Hey folks, you're listening to episode 16 of the Deeply Devoted Podcast, a ministry of the E-Free Church of Bemidji, Minnesota. My name is Eric Nygren. I'm one of the pastors on staff here at E-Free Bemidji, and today on the podcast, I get to talk about one of my favorite things, books. Now, with no guest on the podcast this week, I thought I would take a minute to share a little bit about myself and my own love for books in preparation for something special that's coming in the new year, something I'm calling our podcast read-along in 2025. More on that in a little bit. But to get started, I want to take some time here to just say thank you. I got a notification this week that this podcast has been played over 500 times, which amazes me that many people are actually listening to what we've been recording over the last 16 weeks. And I just want to say thank you to you who are listening, and in particular to those of you who have made a point of letting me know that you are listening. What an encouragement it is to come on a Sunday morning or some other time during the week here at the church, and somebody takes the time to say that you've been listening to the podcast and that you've enjoyed some of the episodes. Now, I say that not because I need any praise, and I hope that you don't take it that way. My aim in doing this podcast from the very beginning has been to bless our church family, to use this as a tool for discipleship, a vehicle for discipleship. I want to use this podcast in such a way that it helps us to think more deeply about the things that help us to grow as disciples of Jesus Christ. As we say all the time here at E-Free Bemidji, we want to become deeply devoted followers of Jesus together, and I hope that this podcast is helping do that. One of the side benefits of this podcast has been to have guests with me along the way, and for you who are listening to get to know these folks that are part of our church family and some guests that are not, but to get to know different folks and just to be blessed by their ministry or the things that they care about or even their testimony. And so I'm just starting to map out the plan for 2025, Lord willing, as we continue to do weekly episodes of this podcast. I'm pretty excited about some of the things that are going to come up in the new year. I hope to do more of our Testimony Tuesday episodes. So if you're listening and you are starting to think, boy, I could do that. I might even like to do that, to tell a little bit more of my story, I would love to have you on the podcast and to be able to share more of your story. I'd be happy to give some coaching, and I always give my guests a heads up of the things, the kind of questions that I'm going to ask. So it should be pretty painless, should be pretty easy, but it's always a fun time. But today, I don't have a guest here in the Deeply Devoted Podcast studio, also known as Classroom 2 here in our building. It's just me, and so I wanted to talk about something that has always been important to me, and that is just my love of books, and there's a purpose here. So if you're someone who walks into my church office, usually one of the first reactions when somebody walks in for the first time into my church office is they'll say, "Boy, that's a lot of books." And then usually the second question is something like, "Have you read all of those?" And so short answer, no, I have not read all of those books. Many of those books are Bible commentaries that aren't really intended to be read cover to cover. They're resources. I like to tell people that if you look closely, you'll notice that there's a lot of bookmarks midway through a lot of those books. So I can usually say, well, I haven't read all those books, but I've started many of them. But my love for books it goes beyond even my church office. Those that have been in our home, you'll know that I've got a little bit of a library there as well. And that's just been a collection that's grown over the years. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, well, where did that love for books and love for reading come from? And to be honest, when I was a kid and really through my middle school and high school years, I was not much of a reader. I was not much of a book kid even back then. Occasionally I'd pick something up. Most of the time, if I was reading a book, it was because it was assigned for class. And so it wasn't until I became a college student where I got to start to choose what I read, that my love for books and love for reading really started to grow. And really, my love for reading good Christian books, because it was at that time that my faith really started to take off as a college student. And so I started to read books on discipleship. I read books on how to share my faith and how to pray and how to study my Bible, and I read books on theology, and whenever somebody would recommend one, I'd try to pick it up. Not always successfully, because as a college student, you usually don't have all that extra cash lying around to buy books. So I got real good at learning how to buy used books. And that led into my seminary days. Right after I graduated from college, we moved on to the Chicagoland area where I did my seminary. And to help kind of offset some of the costs of seminary, I got a job at our local campus bookstore, the Trinity Bookstore. And what was nice about that bookstore was that it was not only your typical college bookstore with your biology textbooks and your seminary books and things like that, but it was a full Christian bookstore. Now those are kind of few and far between these days, thanks to Amazon and online shopping. But back in those days, people would come and really from the surrounding communities and come, and that's where they would buy their good Christian books. And I worked in the book department at first, and so I got to know the books because it was my job to help when somebody would walk in and they'd say, hey, I need a good book on such and such a topic. I would be one of the ones that would go and help them find those books and to make some recommendations. And so I got to know the books really well. But in time, I actually, after I graduated from seminary, before I got my first placement as a pastor, I took on the role as the textbook manager at that location. And one of the blessings of being the textbook manager is at the end of the term, when students would sell back their books, the books they didn't want to keep, there was opportunities there. If the store wasn't buying them back, I found myself wheeling and dealing with students for the books that the store wasn't buying back or the textbook companies weren't buying back. Now, I wasn't really interested in the classic, undergraduate textbooks. I didn't need a chemistry textbook or Psychology 101 textbook, but boy, those seminary books, I picked up my share of those along the way. And so my wife can tell you there were many days where I'd come home with armloads of used books. And I got good at acquiring books very inexpensively and building my library. And I think that's one of the things I love is I call it my library, partly because if you come into my office and you'll notice that I actually take the time to catalog them. I put a sticker on them, just like you'd find in your public library, the old Dewey Decimal System that helps me to track down where they are. But I don't call it my library just for that. I call it my library because I do enjoy being able to pull something off my shelf and lend it to somebody or make a recommendation to somebody. I really feel that over the years, the Lord has blessed me with the ability to really know books and the book world well so that I can make good recommendations, especially in the realm of Christian books that help toward discipleship. I do enjoy being able to lend out my books. Over the years, I've definitely lent some out and have never seen them again, but that's okay. That just gives me an excuse to buy that book again. And I think that's part of the reason why, again, if you know me here at this church, you know that I love to find ways to get good books into other people's hands. So I am always looking for that great deal to be able to give away books. We've been blessed to have some connections where we've been able to get books for free or get them so inexpensively that we are able to give them away to bless people, sometimes a devotional, or to sell them relatively inexpensively, to resell them, much, much cheaper than you could find at a bookstore or on Amazon. And I love to be able to do that because that excites me to know that our people are building their own library of good books, good Christian books. And even this winter, we were able to put out 2 free Advent devotionals. And we've done that at different times of the year, whether that's around Easter or Christmas. Sometimes we've done a Mother's Day giveaway or a Father's Day giveaway. Again, just being able to give away good books. And I just love to be able to do that. Which really leads to this question I get asked a lot about, well, why should I consider reading Christian books? Especially if you're someone that doesn't consider yourself to be much of a reader, and not everybody is, and so I certainly don't want to suggest that everybody needs to be the book lover or the reader that other people are. But I do think it's important that we consider some good books. And like any other topic in a bookstore, even in the realm of Christian books, some books, in my opinion, are much better than others. And so it's not so easy when you walk into let's say a Barnes & Noble or one of these big bookstores into the Christian section or sometimes the spirituality section to really have the discernment of what's good and what's not. And so that's where I love to come in and say, boy, if you're looking for a book on, say, prayer or how to study your Bible or a good men's devotional or women's devotional or just daily devotional, let me make some recommendations. Some are indeed better than others, and whether you're the kind of person that reads one book a year and you're just glad that you finished a book, or you read dozens of books a year, it really doesn't matter how many you read. What matters is if you're going to read books, that you're reading books that help you to grow as a disciple of Jesus Christ. Sometimes people ask me, well, what about ebooks or what about audiobooks? Do those count? And I say, of course they count. One, nobody's keeping count. It doesn't really matter whether it's a physical book or an ebook or an audiobook. That's just a matter of preference. If you're counting how many books you read in 2024, you can count the audiobooks. You in a sense read the book. Just because you didn't have a book in front of your face doesn't mean you didn't read it. But those are great ways to get more good material in front of you. And so if you have the opportunity to read a book on your phone, or you've got something like a tablet or a Kindle or one of those e-readers, that's great. Or to be able to listen to audiobooks in the car. I'm often listening to an audiobook in the car. In fact, sometimes some of the services I use, I actually run out of time for the month because I'm listening to so many audiobooks in my car on my way to work and back, or running around town, things like that. So ebooks, audiobooks, those are all great. Why am I doing all this talking about books? Well, one of the reasons is there's nobody else in the room here with me, so I get to do all the talking this time. But the reason I wanted to take a little bit to talk about books is we're going to do something. We're going to try something in the new year with this podcast. Is we're going to try something I'm calling our podcast read along. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a classic Christian book, and for those that would like to do this, we're going to read along together. And so I'm going to take 6 episodes of this podcast, not in a row, but basically one a month, so over 6 months, to where we'll read a section of a book, and then we'll talk about it on the podcast. And so I'll invite a guest to come and share their thoughts on, the first few chapters, things like that. We're going to make copies of the book available at as best of a discount price as we can come up with. Maybe some of these books, you've already got your own copy. It might be a book that you've always wanted to read, but you've never really sat down to do it. And so I hope that you'll consider reading along with us. And again, if you prefer an ebook or an audiobook or some other format, go for it. Do that. The importance is let's read something together so that we can not only just get the content from the book, but that we can dialogue about it. And that we can do that through the podcast, but I'm hoping that actually spurs us on outside of that to talk with others about what we're reading. So what's the first book of the podcast read along for 2025? Well, folks, we're going to read a classic Christian book, and it was hard for me to decide which one to start with. There's so many good ones, but I thought, let's read together Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. That seems to be one that just, if you ask people what is a classic Christian book, I would guess that some folks, even if you've never read it, would say, I think Mere Christianity is. I hear people talking about that all the time, and it is. And I've read this a number of times, and it's really enjoyable to go through this. So we're going to read together in the new year the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. So I'll have some copies available in our Connection Cafe the week that this episode debuts, or at least that following Sunday for purchase. When they're gone, they're gone. So you might have to get your own copy somewhere or borrow it from the library or find a friend that has it. But Mere Christianity, and I'm not going to say too much about the book just yet because I don't want to steal our thunder, but when you get a copy, you'll notice, at least in the edition that I've got here, it's divided into 4 books. But even within those books, it's divided into what we would call multiple chapters. And so we're going to take those 4 books and actually stretch it out into 6 discussions over the 6-month period. So we'll start in January, a couple weeks in, and we'll talk about it. So if you get a copy of the book and you would like to participate in the podcast read along through Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, get a copy. And you're going to want to read, you're welcome to read the preface, and in mine there's a foreword. Those are always optional, but you're going to want to read Book 1, which is called Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. And there are 5 chapters in that book. And so we're going to, I think it's about the third week of January is when the episode will debut of the first discussion over that section. So really you've got maybe, a month to grab the book and to read along at least through Book 1 of Mere Christianity. Now, I understand and totally fine for a lot of you who are either just not readers or you've already read this book or you just don't really have any interest in it. That's okay. No obligation to read it. Hope that you'll still listen to these episodes, but I won't feel bad if you skip them. But I think you'd be blessed by the discussion. We're going to try to make the discussion helpful and relevant, whether or not you've read it, whether or not you've done your homework. That's okay. And so I hope that you'll consider reading along. Well, I intended this episode to be shorter than normal, partly because I'm really excited about the next episode here, which will be episode 17. If you're looking at your calendar and you recognize the pattern that these episodes come out on Tuesdays, the next one will come out on December 24th. That is Christmas Eve. And so we're going to have a special episode, a special Christmas Eve episode. So you're going to want to, in particular, listen to that. Maybe if you listen to this podcast, you might want to tune in that Tuesday morning if you can, and have a listen, because I'll just say it's going to be timely that it lands on December 24th. That means then that the following episode, which will be the last of the calendar year, if I'm doing my math right, that'll be episode 18. I'm going to do an episode that really focuses on kind of our Bible reading habits in the new year. There's nothing special about starting a new Bible reading plan when the calendar rolls over, and yet that always seems like a great opportunity to maybe start a plan. Sometimes, as we do right now, we've got some Bibles for sale. Sometimes just picking up a new Bible, maybe in a new translation or a study Bible with some good study notes, can really help feed that Bible reading habit. We're going to talk more about that in 2 episodes. That happens to land on December 31st, right as we move into the new year. And again, as I mentioned, I've got some really neat ideas for the coming new year, hoping to talk to some of our global partners, obviously doing the podcast read-along, as well as some more Testimony Tuesday episodes. So I hope that you'll continue to join us into the new year. But this podcast episode wouldn't be complete without me asking that very same question that I ask all of my guests at the end of the episode. It's only fair that I answer that, since again I don't have a guest this week. I always like to ask at the end of the episode this question: what is one thing that you've been blessed by lately that is deepening your devotion to Jesus? Again, we talk about becoming deeply devoted followers of Jesus together, and so I thought I would point the question right back at myself. And at first, as I thought about something that recently has been blessing me to deepen my devotion to Jesus, my natural tendency was to think of one of the books that I read this year. And I can think of some that were really good, and God used in great ways to help me grow in my faith. And I could mention some of those, but I'm not going to. What really has been blessing me, when I think about the answer to that question for me lately, what has been a blessing to me to help deepen my devotion to Jesus? My answer has to be my life group. Now, it's been a little bit different this year because for most of my ministry career and even before that, I have been a small group leader. I'm usually the one who is leading the small group or the life group. Now, there's been exceptions here and there where somebody else has been the leader, but this year I intentionally stepped away from leading a group and let some others lead, trying to multiply that ministry. But that has freed me up to join a life group. And so my wife and I have been going to a Tuesday night life group. It's a small group, and I don't mean that just in the sense of that's what we call them, small groups. It's a small group. Sometimes there are 6 of us, sometimes there are 4 of us, and sometimes when a bunch of us can't be there, we don't meet. So there's room in our life group for those that might want to join one on a Tuesday night. But it has just been a real blessing to be a part of that, to be able to just simply open up the Word together and to talk about it, to think through the passage of Scripture that we heard on the previous Sunday, and to talk about it, and to hear from one another. And I love to talk about the Bible, so sometimes I bite my tongue and try to let others speak, and I try not to grab the steering wheel and lead the group. But our group leaders are fantastic, so shout out to Hudson and Leah Cermak for opening their home and for leading our group. It's been a real blessing to me. And so I say that not merely as a commercial for life groups, although I'm always trying to give a commercial for life groups, but just to say that has been a real blessing to me this fall and this winter, to be able to be in a life group on a Tuesday night and to open up the Word together. Well, that'll do it then for this episode 16 of the Deeply Devoted podcast. Again, we've got a very special Christmas Eve episode coming up next week, but want to remind you that you can always email the podcast. You can email me at podcast@efcbemidji.org, and you can share ideas, comments, questions, provide feedback, however you want to use that. But we're going to use that tool as well, especially as we come into the read-along. So just remember that that's out there, that's available. And thanks for listening again to another episode, and we'll do another one next week.